All right. Greetings and salutations, my friends. Welcome to a pre-recorded version of a talk that I gave at Gen in the city organization on the 11th of November 2025. And here's a public version that I'm releasing to YouTube. And it will be about, understanding career letters and all the stuff that goes with those. As you can see here, we have all the letter types that you should be aware of. And I'm sorry, it's a terrible joke, but I couldn't resist. So let's really start. So why am I giving this talk? I originally gave a similar talk back at Avast around 5 years ago, and it had quite success, meaning that people were engaged and people then started asking questions and considering their career options and so on. So I would like to share this information and also want to do an updated version of the talk. Also, I've been part of various initiatives, activities related to career letters, like back at Avast and here at Gen. And this topic is somehow close to my heart. I like to discuss it. I like to discuss, and help people with their careers and, discussing their career options and so on. So that's basically why I'm doing this talk. There is a couple of disclaimers. First of all, anything that's related to career letters, titles, responsibilities, expectations, there is no standardization whatsoever, meaning that you generally cannot compare like two companies because the titles and letters can be vastly different, and the same titles can mean entirely different thing. Also, I need something to illustrate it on, and I decided to use software engineering because software engineering is the closest form of engineering to my heart. And but if you do any kind of other engineering, feel free to just substitute it. Or whenever I say software, just think about systems, data, research, and so on. And finally, this version of the talk is really generic. There are no gen specific specifics whatsoever. So it's just purely, to give you an opportunity to understand all what is going on with career letters. So let's dive in. But before we do that, there is just one thing that I want to get off the table. And basically, there are the terms programmer, software developer, software engineer, and also at some companies, there is this mix called software development engineer. And people often ask, what is the difference between those? So I guess everyone who is watching this video knows who a programmer is. And a software developer is a programmer hired by a company that calls, their programmers software developers. And as for software engineers, I guess you have guessed it, a software engineer is a programmer who's working for a company that calls their programmers software engineers. So there's basically like no difference whatsoever. There might be some people who will tell you, but hey, there is just this difference here and there. Hey, it's not like maybe in some very specific context, maybe some companies really differentiate between those two, but I don't think so. So for any general purposes, treat those terms as the same. I'll use the term software engineer or just engineer. All right, so let's start. What is a career letter? So a career letter is a metaphorical letter, right? It's not a actual letter that we saw on the terrible joke slide. And it shows the levels that an individual can obtain within a company. And usually moving from a one level to another signifies career growth. Here you can see a screenshot from the levels.fyi website, which lists various career letters from companies. And it also allows you to compare them, compare their titles, which is quite useful. And also feel free to check it out, this progression.fyi page, which provides career frameworks, responsibilities, and so on. So this is useful. And at the end of this talk, I would like you to understand like what is going on, like what is with these numbers like L5, L4, what is this staff and principal, and have a way of understanding the various career letters that are there. Why do we even need those? I would say that they are beneficial to both employees and companies for various reasons. So let's start. In terms of engagement, people need to see that their careers can progress or are progressing, and some people might leave if there is not enough option for them, to progress in your company. Or you might hire someone because your career ladder is great and allows them to really shine and do what they want to do at your company. They also bring clarity, and not only like for people managers, but especially for so-called individual contributors or ICs for short, who are people who do not have any direct reports, in cross trust to managers, because their career paths and expectations are often more fuzzy than when it comes to management. They also encourage or force companies to be really, clear about, what should be the report responsibilities from various levels, from the various positions, and really put this down in writing so that people, really know what is expected from them. It's a very useful tool for people managers. For example, in terms of performance management, they can see, this person is performing in this way, and I can compare it to what are the expectations from level at which this person is on. And also, it can be useful for individual development, let's say when building and working on an individual development plan, because you can have career discussions between the manager and the employee. I would also say that having a career ladder results in more fair promotion process, because then the expectations are set and should be considered during the promotion. So it's no longer just, hey, I think that this people is senior. I don't think that this person is senior, and so on. They generally help with recruiting, because once you have that career ladder, you can decide, all right, I'm hiring for this particular position, and here are the requirements that I have. And maybe if we have someone more senior at the interview, we can decide, to hire them, but on a higher position or higher level. And it also allows you to do apples comparisons instead of comparing apples to oranges, which might happen if you don't have any career at all. And finally, I would say that it's a useful tool for HR as well, because it can help with creating compensation ranges and comparing career ladders to other career ladders from within the same market, from companies within the same market. For the purpose of this presentation, I've created an example career ladder. Again, it's not a specific to any other company, definitely not to Gen, but it illustrates the concepts and the common titles that I think it's very useful to have it as an illustration. So when you start your career, you usually end up, in this junior engineer position, maybe right from the college or after a boot camp. Then, as you grow and you gain experience and independence, you become a so-called mid-level engineer or just engineer. And then you can become a senior engineer, or maybe here we can see that we have senior engineer 1 and senior engineer 2, because this might be split into two levels, which basically says that you are independent enough to do stuff on your own, to do the work, to do the tasks, and you are knowledgeable enough, and so on. Now, if you want, or if companies want to increase the impact of their people, there is the option that is available, I would say, in all the companies, and that's basically moving the people into management, in this case, people management, which means that you become a manager and you take on direct reports, let's say 6 to 10, and you really take care of the team. You ensure that people there are happy, you boost the morale, you try to shield the team from organizational politics, and so on. And as you move further, for example, to senior engineering manager or an engineering director, you no longer manage ICs, you manage other managers. So for example, as an engineering director, you might have 5 managers under you. And then when you move to senior engineering director and VP of engineering, you no longer have just managers as your reports, but you have other directors. So that's basically the top that you can get, apart from the C-level leadership that I'll describe later. If you want to know more, feel free to check out this presentation from Gen Developer Conference in the summer of 2025, where I describe this people management track in a closer detail. Now, what companies saw is that, hey, like not everyone is a good fit to move into people management, but some people really are like good fit for leadership, not just for people management. And we might be losing talent if we only have this option available. So the other option that many companies have or start having is a so-called technical leadership track or staff plus engineering. The term originates from this title, and basically staff plus engineering means the staff and above. So anything that is in here. It's a leadership track, meaning that you are expected to be leading something, but you will not be leading like the teams from a people management perspective. But you might be leading big projects spanning multiple teams or multiple organizations. You might be designing and architecting, complex systems, translating requirements from business talk to, the technical and the talk that engineers understand. You might be solving gnarly, complex issues. For example, hey, we need to scale to 100 times more users than we have right now in our main product. How we do this. Or you might become the right hand for an executive, to help get them, important stuff off their plate so that they can focus on other stuff. But still, it's an individual contribution track, meaning that you will have no direct reports. First of all, uh, do not really pay too much attention to those titles because it can differ, company from company. For example, some companies do not have this staff title, uh, and call these people, let's say, principals. Some companies have those reversed, meaning that that those companies, the principal is on a lower rank than staff, or the namings could be entirely different. Like, again, this is just an example. And if you are wondering, like, what the heck does that staff adjective mean? It originates from US military and it is still being used today. For example, in terms of police force, you have sergeants and then you have staff sergeants who are one rank above them. So the word, means just, hey, staff is something of a higher rank than, without staff. And in terms of principal, it means, primary or main. And again, it's just an adjective to use to have enough title, I would say. So really don't pay too much attention to that. These are just words to describe the various positions. So this is called a dual track career ladder, meaning that you have the option to either stay as a senior engineer or decide to move into people management or become a staff plus engineer by moving to the technical leadership track. If you want to know more about staff plus engineering, I gave a talk at, again, Gen Developer Conference. It was a different one than the previously mentioned, where I describe, this track in a greater detail. So let's dive into the fundamentals. In terms of identification, again, we can use titles, which you have already seen, or we can use numbers. So for example, there was this L5 engineer in the Google ladder, or we can use the word grade instead of level. This is something that some companies use. So you can describe someone by their, grade or level. When it comes to management, usually the counting is done from the opposite direction, meaning that L0 is the CEO, L1 are the people reporting to the CEO, let's say CTO, CFO, and so on, and then L3 managers are the VPs and senior directors and directors reporting to the, let's say, CTO. So beware when you see that in terms of management. Now, in terms of seniority, there are two options to differentiate. We can either use the senior prefix or we can use numbers, in this case, Roman numerals. So for example, you might have an engineering manager, and when this person is, let's say, senior enough, or maybe there's a manager who has other managers as his reports, you can say that he's a senior engineering manager. Or you might use Roman numerals. So we have already seen this in our example here. So for example, we can have engineer 1, engineer 2, engineer 3, or like whatever you need. It's just a way to differentiate between the different levels. Now, an important distinction is between internal titles and external titles. Also, the internal titles might be called job titles, and the external titles might be business titles. So what we have seen here are usually internal titles. In some cases, you might use these internal titles even externally, meaning that you can put them on LinkedIn or like talk with other people outside of your company. But in some cases, what happens is that there are specific external titles or business titles. For example, you can have a senior director as an internal title, but the external title might be, global head of platform engineering. Basically, that something that you can, come up with, and usually it requires your manager's approval. But again, it's just a different way of describing like what is your position. Now there is a difference between grade or level and a position. So, for example, let's say that people at these positions are on grade 10. Just an example, just a random number. So when you say that someone is at grade 10, you don't know whether they are on the IC track or on the people management track. Uh, for that, you need to use the titles. But in some cases, for example, when the compensation ranges are tied to a grade, you can then say that these two people, because they are on the same grade, have similar compensation ranges. Now, position versus role. Let me illustrate this on an example. You can have dedicated people who serve as project managers, meaning that they drive the execution of a project and they ensure the trains are running on time and so on. But there might not be any project managers, and in this case, other people assume this role, meaning that a manager can be, for example, in the role of a project manager for a certain project. And similarly with architect, like some companies have dedicated positions called architect, senior architect, chief architect, and so on. But even though you don't have these specific positions, uh, anyone can basically become an architect, let's say for a particular system or for a particular project, even though they do not have the architect title. So that's the distinction between a dedicated position and between a role that anyone can assume. Now, there are two caveats. First of all, the titles might not correspond to the work that the person does, meaning that, for example, someone was a director in the past, but after a reorg, they lost, uh, almost all the team. So they only have, let's say, I don't know, 5 people there, but they are still a director because companies usually do not downgrade people. And in some cases, you might see, unfortunately, title inflation, meaning that companies, in order to hire or attract people, they use, higher level titles for someone who, shouldn't have ordinarily this title. So it's unfortunate, but it happens. And again, let me stress that the same job title can mean different things. So for example, as I said, like this principal engineer at one company might be really on the same level as an engineering director, but at other companies, it can be like on this level or even like on this level. So you cannot compare two principal engineers from two different companies if they have different career ladders, which they usually do. So please beware. Now, there are various common questions that arise when considering career ladders. The first of them is, how many levels there should be. And it depends on the size of your company, because if you have 100 engineers, it might not make sense to have all these titles and these positions that we have seen. But if you are a corporation with 5,000 engineers, then it might make sense to differentiate, as we have seen in the example career ladder. The other question is, should the compensation be tied to levels, meaning that, for example, should like people on the same level earn roughly the same, let's say, maybe 20% plus and 20% minus. And again, it depends. Some companies do that because it's usually simpler for HR. Some companies do not. So again, there's no right answer. It depends. The other question is whether when you move further down the ladder or up the ladder, let's say, whether you should have more responsibility. And here I would say that the general answer is yes. It might not be the case in some companies, but usually when you move up the ladder, you gain more responsibility. Meaning that, for example, here you are responsible for the team, while here you are responsible for multiple teams, and here you might be responsible for the entire part of engineering in your organization. And similarly on the IC track. So it's usually the case. It might not be in some very specific cases. Another question is, when should a person be promoted? Again, it differs. Usually, I would say that when they are already doing the job of the next, level. For example, if you have a mid-level engineer who is already doing the job of a senior engineer, then they should be promoted. In terms of leadership, then, and especially when it comes to people management, if you are promoting someone from a senior engineer to an engineering manager, then you usually promote them, and after that they start, leading the team. Or in some cases, they might be an informal manager, or they might be a team lead who, leads a smaller team and still acts as a, hands-on member for that team. So again, it depends. You might be asking, okay, like who should I be reporting to? So again, this depends. So for example, if you are a staff engineer, you might be reporting to an engineering manager because you are a staff engineer for a particular team. So you drive the execution, prepare technical strategy for that team, unblock people in that team, and so on. But let's say that you are a principal engineer or senior principal engineer, then it might not make much sense for you to report to an engineering manager because you would be reporting too low. So you wouldn't have enough oversight, and you wouldn't know like what is happening in the company. So you wouldn't have the option to have the impact that is expected from you. So if you are at this level, then you would be usually reporting to an engineering director or senior director, or like even a VP. Another question that people ask, like, is the goal of the game to really reach the end, meaning the distinguished engineer and VP of engineering? To which the answer is a resounding no. Like that's not the goal. And as we will see, there are cases when you actually might not want to do this. So, for example, you might even want to stay as a senior engineer because you don't want to move into leadership, because this is something that you might not enjoy, or it might not get you energized. So definitely, like, the goal is not to aim to get as high as possible. Like, you should at least aim to become a senior engineer, because it is like not good for companies to keep juniors and mid-level engineers like forever. The general expectation is that you will reach the senior engineer position eventually. If you do not, that there is stuff that needs to happen because there is something wrong. So you should at least reach the senior engineer position. Um, some levels might be called final, or in other terms, like career positions, meaning that when you reach those positions, you are no longer expected to get promoted beyond that. And I would say that the first career position or final position is like the senior engineer before you switch to either like technical leadership or people management. So when you become a senior engineer, I would say that in most companies, you will no longer be required or expected to grow and to move into these higher levels. Um, but you can if you want to, but you are not expected to do. And similarly with all the other positions right down here, maybe someone is like really great as a line manager, and they do not want become an engineering director who has other managers reporting to him. Uh, then the question is, what does senior mean? Like, what is the difference between an engineer and a senior engineer, or maybe between an engineering manager and a senior engineering manager? And again, this depends on the expectations that you have. In some cases, it might just mean that you've been doing the job long enough. In other cases, there are, really different expectations between an engineering manager and a senior engineering manager. So it depends. And I would say that the most important question is, we have seen this graphical representation, we know the titles, but what are actually the responsibilities of the people there, and what do we expect it from them? And that's a great question, and this is something that we'll cover next. So there are various options of specifying expectations. I will show some of them. The first one is called job descriptions or JDs. And this is something that I guess you have already seen. It's a list that specifies the title, then what is the description of like what are you going to do, what do you need to do the job, what are the expectations from you, and this information can be provided for all the various positions. And this is very similar to job offers that you see on the internet because they usually describe all this. The problem with this approach is that if you want to compare a software engineer with, let's say, senior software engineer, then you really need to do a diff of those two job descriptions. So it's not that easy to see the differences. A better option, and the one that I like the most, is called a competency matrix or a career path matrix. And what it is a table, two-dimensional table, where in one dimension, it can be either in columns or rows, it doesn't really matter. You have the basically the skills or the areas of competencies that you expect from people. For example, here we have technical skills, we have execution skills, then you can describe the impact, then you might have some expectations in terms of communication, leadership, and you can have any number of those. And then in the other dimension, you have all the positions that are available within your company. And in the cells, you describe the expectations from a particular skill and a particular position. So for example, when you take here, these are the expectations for engineer 2 instead of execution, like getting stuff done. A couple of notes here. Uh, the expectations are cumulative, meaning that it doesn't suffice for you, for example, when you are here or when you get here, to just look at this row. You need to consider everything that came before that. So even like this. So basically, engineer 2 is expected to know everything that an engineer 1 does. And we will take a look at other caveats and expectations later in the talk. Um, Then there is the option, there are various other options, basically how to specify those. Let me just give you a very specific example. This one is from Medium. It's called the Snowflake model. The site does no longer exist, and I believe that maybe even the model is not used because it is very difficult to be used correctly, but let me describe it. What you basically have, you have a set of expectations, and again, these need to be defined somewhere, and then you assign points to those expectations, meaning that, for example, in terms of project management, what does it mean if you have just 1 point there, 2 points there, 3, 4, and so on. And then you can use those points to define the current level. Here's the number of total points, and engineers generally love numbers, and even I'm starting drooling even talking about this because you have these points to next level, and it almost looks like a role-playing game that you could play. Which is great, but this is very difficult from the managerial viewpoint to handle because it is like too low level or like too granular to be used correctly. So I don't think that this is used anywhere. It's just an example that you can basically specify the expectations or the letters in any way you want. Now you might be asking, all right, so what if I really want to step up the ladder? What if I really want to get to the top? So what are the expectations? And again, we don't have enough time to describe all the expectations from all the positions, but let me give you a brief overview. So usually, the higher up you go on the ladder, then the broader your scope is, and also the impact. For example, as I said, like an engineering manager might be responsible only for a specific team, but when you are a VP of engineering, you might be responsible for all the engineering that happens in your company. Again, it depends on the size of the company. Also, generally, you have the more power to influence things like within your scope. Generally, you also have like more and more responsibilities. So, for example, you are not responsible for just this small project, but you might be responsible for a portfolio of different projects of bigger sizes if you are at let's say maybe these levels. Also, you need to think more strategically. So it no longer suffices when you move up the ladder to do one Jira task after another. When you are senior enough, it will be your job to create those Jira tasks and basically come up with the problems that people need to solve instead of solving them on your own. This is expected, but let me say it anyway. The higher up you go, the more money you generally earn. Also, the higher up you go, the more you have to deal with people. And here I really like a quote from Siggy Steffensen, who's our CTO, that when you are at like these high positions, then there are no longer technical issues. Like all the issues are people issues because you need to convince someone to do that or convince someone not to do something, influence people, and so on. So it's literally more and more about dealing with people instead of solving technical issues. Then, the higher up you go, the more so-called soft skills matter, which are the skills that, engineers either do not like enjoy improving or like they do not like, these are the skills like having great communication, being able to, persuade and influence people, having good presentation skills. And these skills really matter when you move to the higher positions and more than those hard skills like knowing how replication in Redis works and so on. Generally, also the higher up you go, the more meetings you will have, right? So, for example, if you are a CTO or like a VP of engineering, then you will basically spend all your days at meetings. um, what this effect of life is, the higher up you go, the less so-called hands-on work you will do. So you will not code that much. And let's say that you consider like even these positions, then here you might not be coding at all, or maybe only sporadically, or maybe just creating some POCs, but generally, when you are in the leadership section, uh, it is not your goal, or like the biggest impact that you can have is not through the code that you write. It's usually through the other means, leading the projects, architecting the systems, driving the teams, and so on. And also like the fewer people there are, and again, I will give more details about this later. And this is something that you can imagine, but basically, for example, when you are a VP of engineering, the expectations are really fuzzy. It's basically, hey, your job is to take care of about all the engineering that we have, right? Without any specifics. Um, when you see career letters, you may stumble upon some other positions or names. So, for example, a team lead. This might be a person who leads a smaller team, let's say 4 or 5 people, and still acts as a regular member of the team, meaning that the team lead still does a lot of coding and so on. Or you might have a tech lead position. Again, like the meaning differs from company to company. In some companies, this can be a position, in other, it's just a role. But this is the person who drives the execution of projects, teams, unblocks the people, creates the technical strategy, and so on. Then you can have this architect whose goal is to design systems, prepare the architecture, translate business requirements to engineering requirements, or like the requirements that engineers can understand. Um, or you can talk to the users, start creating roadmaps, prioritizing, like focusing on what should be the features that we need to build and in what order. Um, or you can have a project manager which drives the execution of particular projects. Then you might also have program managers which drive programs which are formed by multiple projects. So instead of driving just one project, you drive multiple projects within the program. If you are doing the Scrum Agile methodology, there are terms such as Scrum Master or Product Owner. In some companies, there is also this fellow title. And again, the exact like meaning differs from company to company. In some companies, it's just an honorary title that is awarded to the most senior people there. In some companies, it might be, for example, a creator of a programming language that is hired by the company to increase the prestige of that company. And in this case, like they are named fellows. and so on. So it really differs. Then we have this whole C-suite, executive management, like CTO, Chief Technical Officer, CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and many other, executives. So these are the ones who are reporting to the CEO, the big boss. And there are many, 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 many more. Now, to manage your expectations. First of all, let me describe what really must happen before someone can be promoted. So first of all, you really need to prove that you are, worth it, to, let's say, hold the hammer of Thor, so that you have the necessary technical chops, the necessary skills to do the next job. But this is not enough. What also needs to happen, there needs to be a business need for the promotion and also an opportunity. So for example, let's say that you are working in a team that already has a staff engineer in there and you want to become promoted to that staff engineer as well. There might not be space for you in the team. So what might happen is that you will need to become a staff engineer, but for outside of the team, or like for multiple teams, or maybe there just isn't this opportunity, so there is like no option for you to be promoted, maybe until the staff engineer leaves. Again, it depends on the expectations, company, and so on. And finally, and importantly, there needs to be a budget, because usually the higher up you go, the more money the company needs to pay you, and there might not be enough budget for you to get promoted, in which case like you can technically be promoted without the added compensation package, but again, this might not be what you want, or maybe even the company might not want this. Uh, what I want to stress is that when you move into leadership, being it people management or technical leadership, it's really more an entirely different job requiring a different set of skills than really a promotion. So please take this in mind when considering, for example, from going from senior engineer into staff engineer or engineering manager, because it might sound like the staff engineer is really similar to a senior engineer, which it is, but it's a really different role, and uh, so you need to take this into consideration. Which means that in some cases you really might not want to even aim for the promotion, because the work that you would need to be doing might, stress you a lot, decrease the level of energy that you have. It might not energize you. In which case, like, it is up to you really to decide whether the money and maybe the glory and what comes along is worth it. In terms of the competency matrices or expectations in general, please take in mind that they are not a checklist, which means that you might satisfy all the requirements that are there in the competency matrix and still not get promoted because, for example, there is not this opportunity or budget. And even if you do not satisfy all the requirements, you still might get promoted, uh, because again, like, people are not expected to satisfy 100% of the requirements in general. Now you might be considering comparing yourself to your colleagues to see like where you stand, but beware that this can be really difficult. And let me illustrate. Let's say that you are a mid-level engineer and you are comparing yourself to your colleague who's a senior engineer one. But that senior engineer one's been doing the job for 2 years. So what do you have to do? You need to compare yourself to that person 2 years ago to have fairer picture. But still, like, people have different skills, different personalities, different visibility. So it's really difficult to compare yourself to others. So I suggest not doing that. Finally, in terms of expectations, like on the number of positions, I have created this chart which doesn't have a y-axis on purpose because the absolute numbers are not important. What is important is this trend. And again, this is just a made-up example, just to illustrate the point that the expectation is the senior engineer, like let's say around this level, is the peak, so it has the highest number of people there. But when you move up and down, the number of positions decreases. So for example, instead of staff engineers here, you might generally have one staff engineer, let's say paid per 8 engineer, so for a team, and so on and so on. And for example, you might have just one distinguished engineer in your entire company, or you might not even have just one person there. So the expectations, do not really expect everyone to get to this position or a company to have 100 distinguished engineers. It doesn't make much sense because there wouldn't be enough work for them to do. Okay, so to conclude, I have here some links to other talks and other posts. Um, so first of all, if you are interested in my own career, feel free to check out this blog post from 2023. Then if you want to know, what is the right career path for me? Should I stay as a senior engineer? Should I move into technical leadership, or should I start managing people? Check out this article that I wrote. Also, there is this article that I wrote. It's about, not all developers wanting to be managers, which received like 40 comments, so it was quite popular. Also, here are the talks that I mentioned previously on the people management track and on the staff engineering track. And also here is a link to the previous talk that I mentioned that I gave at Avast in 2021, which is an older version of the talk that you are currently watching. And of course, these are just the stuff that I wrote or presented, but there are, tons of different resources you can use on the internet or in the world available. If you like books, here are a couple of recommendations. In general, I can recommend these two books, one from Daniel Heller, the one from Gergely Orosz, about, software engineering careers in general and your skills and what you should focus on and so on. If you want to move into staff plus engineering or technical leadership, I can either recommend this book by Tanya Riley or a bit older one by Will Larson, like older one by 1 year. If you just have the time to read one book, I suggest focusing on the Tanya Riley's one. But if you have enough time, read both of them because both of them are good. In terms of people management, there are many, many, many books on this topic. So let me just pick two of them. The first one by James Steiner. I like this book, especially if you are beginning as an engineering manager, because this book really describes the basics, like how to do one-on-one performance management, like what actually is my job as an engineering manager. So it can be quite helpful for people who are new to people management. And then there is The Manager's Path by Camille Fournier. This is a book that I can recommend reading to basically anybody, even if you do not want to pursue the manager's path. All right, folks. So thank you very much for listening. We have reached the end. Here is just a quite quick summary. In the real talk there is a Q&A, but this is just a pre-recorded version, so there will not be any Q&A. If you have any questions, though, feel free to reach out in the comments below the video. And yeah, that's basically it. So thank you very much for listening, and see you next time. Bye bye.